All right, for trimming, you will need a few things. You'll need your piece that is leather hard, a small container of water, a sponge, clay to secure your piece, a needle, and a trimming tool. Okay, trimming tool has two sides. There's a square side and a curved side right here. Okay. I also recommend you have the trimming steps in front of you so that you can position this and read it as you go. Alright, so we'll go ahead and move all our tools aside. The only things we'll need for the first part of trimming is your main piece. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your piece and you're going to pop it off your board already, and you should have a piece that looks more or less like this. You have the excess clay here, you have a flat bottom, and it's ready to flip over and start trimming. The first thing I recommend is feeling how thick the bottom of the clay is. So I'm holding the bottom here, seeing the thickness, positioning it so I can kind of gauge, okay, we have about ½ an inch of clay, so about that much clay to remove. Alright, next you're going to position your piece upside down on the wheel, and I trim directly on the metal wheel head because I have these things called concentric circles. These will help me center the piece by pushing it into center. Now on your centering steps on the handout, it says use a needle. Instead of using the needle, we'll be pushing and pulling the clay. Okay. Alright, so I'm positioning the camera a little more overhead so you can see this part right here and the edge of the clay. So when we center the clay, you want to try your best to center it based on your eyeballs, just pushing and pulling the clay, mostly just pushing. So when you center the clay, you try to put it as centered as possible within the ring that is closest to the rim. So this ring right here is closest to this rim here. So I want to try to center it as best as possible. For this example, I'm going to off-center it. Okay? And when you spin the wheel, you're looking at the ring closest to the piece, and you're trying to find the point where your clay gets closest to that ring. Okay, so right there, right there, right there. So you're gonna locate that spot, position it in front of you so it's right in front of your body. So for the camera, I'll position it here. So pretend like this is my 6 o'clock. And then from here, you're pushing it away from you, okay? So towards midnight. So if I was sitting here, this would be my 6, this would be my 9, this would be my midnight, this would be my 3. So you push it away from you. And then you spin the wheel and you repeat. So I'm gonna go back and use this as my reference. Every time the piece gets closest to my finger, or in this case the concentric circle, I'm gonna locate that spot, position it in front of me, so right here is right in front of me, and I'm gonna be pushing it away from me, so towards midnight. And then I repeat. Spin the wheel, look at my finger. Every time the piece gets closest to my finger, I locate that spot, and I push it away from me. Okay, and this is to center your piece. And you keep doing that until either the rim is centered or the middle part of your piece is centered. So it's up to you. Depending on how your piece is thrown, sometimes the rim might be perfectly centered, but the middle may not, or it might be inverted. Okay, so this is step numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now on the paper it says to mark it with a needle. This I think is a little faster, and if you don't mind it being slightly off, you can just use your eyeball to help. Okay. So right there, that looks perfectly center. I'm looking at the ring. I'm not seeing the rim move out and in a lot, so that looks pretty good. So there we go. Now I'm ready to start trimming. But before I do that, I need to do step 4, which is to take your clay and create some logs or lugs or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to rip off 4 pieces about the size of large grapes. And then I'm going to roll each one into a coil. I'm taking it in my hand and I'm just rolling. Okay. This one's a little long, so I'll cut it. And now I'm ready to start securing this to the wheel head. So you place your free hand on top. Your other hand will then gently push the log or lug, whatever you want to call it, to contour to the shape of your piece. And then you push down into the wheel head, so straight down, so that the clay gets stuck. Okay. You want to try your best not to push it inward towards the piece because that can shift it off center. You can also dent your rim. So once again, contour and push it straight down. And then you repeat that until all of your pieces, your lugs, logs, whatever you want to call it, are secure. Okay, and then just to make sure it's extra secure, I'm gently pushing just the top into the piece ever so slightly. And you have to remember, if your piece is pretty wet, you may not want to skip this step because this can cause your piece to dent and ding. Okay, and now we go ahead and take care of the wiggle test. Give it a slight jiggle, make sure you don't feel it move side to side. Okay, and I'm just adjusting the edges here. All right, so now when we trim, if this was the clock, we have your 3, 6, 9, and midnight. Now if I were to draw lines from the center and go out between 3 and 6, this is the area we want to focus on trimming. If we draw another line to split that, we want to try to trim in this section here where the X's are. I don't recommend trimming here. Okay, so you always start from the middle, pull out towards 3, or pull slightly towards you towards 4, and we try to trim the outside the same way between this quadrant. Now we switch to the trimming tool. Now the trimming tool has two sides. There's a flat and there's a round. Depending on what you're doing, you switch between the two. We're going to start off with the flat. And there's two main ways to hold it. First one is like a pencil, and you'd be trimming the top like this. Okay, your free hand will grip your trimming hand. Okay. The second way to hold it is in your palm, like so. So the crease is holding it. Metal part here is braced against your finger. And then we trim the outside like this. So I'm going to hold it like this first, and my free hand is going to wrap around my trimming hand, and I'm going to brace my legs and my elbows together so I'm hunched. Okay. And the first thing we do is we trim this overhanging part. So this is number 5 on the trimming stages. Okay, so when you start trimming, I am removing this overhanging part. So I start with a bevel, trim at an angle, and I slowly straighten it out and round. And I repeat, start at a bevel, I slowly round. So this is a good habit to get into because this type of trimming, starting at an angle and rounding, is very similar to what we will be doing when we start trimming the outside of your piece. Yep. And you're going to keep doing this until you have trimmed away all that overhanging clay and you have a nice vertical wall here. Okay. Now, that's number 5, the first part. The second part of number 5 is marking your feet lines. Okay, so here is a final bowl. This is the foot. This is where we trim inside, we trim outside, and then we need to create a foot. So right here, this outside edge right here is where this clay now is. We remove all this excess. This inside here where we trim down, that's where we trim this. Now we need to mark the outside of the foot and inside of the foot. So vocabulary, this is called a foot right here. So what we do to mark the foot is I like going about a ½ inch in from the outermost edge, make a mark, and then I go another ¼ inch in and I make a mark. And that's where my feet will be. So to mark it then, I spin the wheel and I drop the needle on those lines I made. Now when you drop the needle, you need to make sure that your needle is parallel or running in the same direction that your needle line is. Don't have it pointing in, don't have it pointing out. And I recommend holding it like a pencil, and you're dropping it down like it is a record player. All right? Now if you drop it in and you see it dancing like that, you get your cup of water, put some on your finger, some water in your finger, and then you just buff it out. Let the wheel spin and do its work. And then you're going to go ahead and try again until you get a line that doesn't dance. So that one dances a little bit. I'm going to repeat that. Okay, right there. So I have my feet lines. So now when I trim, I'm trimming away this inside X, I'm trimming away this outside X. So removing this, removing that, and I get my foot. So going back to this piece, that's exactly how this one was. So we remove the inside, remove the outside, and we get a nice finished bowl. All right, so that's number 5. Number 6 and 7 can be done in any order. Number 6 is trimming the inside. Number 7 is trimming the outside. I personally like trimming the outside first. So I trim this down and I level this out so that then I match this to the outside height. Okay, so let's go ahead. Hold it in your palm, starting with the flat side. And I'm going to start trimming this. So just like how we got rid of this edge, we start at an angle, bevel, and slowly turn it down the side to straighten. Okay, and repeat, bevel. You turn it down on the side to meet. All right. Now I'm going to show you how I normally trim. And what I like doing, this is a little more advanced, but you can give this a shot later. I trim a little hole here, a little indent. Okay. And that's where my left hand will be. I apply downwards pressure with this finger, and this allows me to ensure that I can trim aggressively and put a lot of pressure here, and it won't shift over. Okay. So here we go. And then my hands brace up against the tool. So now they are moving together like a unit. Okay, so trim angle, and I roll it down the side. Okay, now let's say I want this more vertical. I can start right here, and I slowly start tilting the bottom curve, the bottom corner of the tool. And I can stand it up and make a nice vertical edge. So now every time I trim, I hold it at an angle, and then I slowly turn the tool until it's vertical. So now you can really start seeing my foot develop. Right there. That looks like a good foot. And I like using this height here as the height of my foot. Okay. Now that looks pretty good. Now I need to adjust the outside. I have this weird bump that doesn't look very clean. So I'm gonna flip to the round side now. I'm gonna start here, and then I'm just gonna trim down. And then I trim up. And I'm just gonna keep going back and forth until I can feather that curve to make it match the shape I want. And then you can switch to the flat side and kind of clean it up. So I'm trying to get a nice even curve. So you might need to, as the wheel spins, take a step back, look at it at eye level to ensure that your curve matches the shape that you want. And right there, I'm happy with that. This curve gently follows and matches up to there. Okay, so that is step 7, removing all the X's. Because I have these throw lines, I'm going to go ahead and get those carved back in. So I have this other trimming tool I like for my throw lines. And I'm just going to go ahead and then just carve some undulating lines to make it more seamless. All right, so that was step 7. Now step 6 is to trim the inside. So I worked in reverse. So now I'm going to trim the inside. And I won't be able to use this dent anymore because I need to trim in there. And I'm going to draw my lines back in. All right. So if I draw those lines back in, we want to focus on trimming between this area. So we pull out towards 3, or we pull out towards us at 45, so like 4-ish. Okay. We don't want to pull towards us at 6 because the tool can end up getting ripped out of our hand. We don't want to let it drift up towards 2 o'clock because the same thing, the turning of the wheel can cause this to grip, and then we gouge our clay. So I start off with the curved side, hold it like a pencil, start in the middle, apply light pressure, and I slowly bring it out towards my 3 o'clock. When I get closer to 3, I start slowing down the tool. I get right up against the line, and I stop before I hit it. Okay, and then for this purpose of the demo, I'm going to darken my line so you can really see where I'm going. Okay, so you can see I stopped right before. And then you keep repeating. Now I'm trimming with my elbow off my leg because my back's bad. I need to trim a little more upright. So I start from the center and I work my way out. Okay. And then I'm actually left-handed. So for all you lefties out here, you can trim with your left hand like this, trim down, and then you can actually pull it towards your 4 o'clock. All right, and now the depth. You want to try to have a nice even clay wall. So since my piece was about a 1/4 inch thick and my base was about a 1/2 inch thick, I want to trim this down to about a 1/4 inch. Now, a rule of thumb when you trim, ideally you want this whole thing sloped so that the middle is the highest, it gets lower as it gets to the outside, and that outside height matches this outside height. Okay, so it should slope. So nice curve. So if I were to cut this foot off, you see a nice dome. So I'm going to keep trimming the middle. I'm going to trim the middle down a little more. And then as I trim outwards towards my outer part of my foot, I'm going to start sloping it, getting a little deeper. Okay. And then you can trim with either hand, but like I said, I'm left-handed, so I gravitate towards using that. Okay, next part, getting rid of this slope here on the inside. Before I do that, I'm going to use my flat side just like a rake. I'm putting my finger in the opening of the tool to collect all the trimmings. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this edge. Now to do that, you have to do it at midnight, and this is one of the few times you end up trimming at midnight. So I rotate the tool so it's vertical. Then I'm placing it at midnight, focusing the pressure at the bottom corner here, and then I'm just pushing straight up into midnight until I remove all that clay and it is at the line that I want. So right there, I can stop, remove all this extra clay here. And my piece is actually a little on the drier side. My trimmings are coming off almost as dust rather than ribbons. So what I recommend, whenever you trim and your pieces are coming off as dust instead of ribbons, coat the area where you're trimming with water, and that will hydrate that section. So when you trim, it would actually come off as ribbons instead of dust. Okay, and I'm going to keep trimming. I got to lower this a little more. So here we go. I'm just going to fast forward this part of the video and then just keep trimming until I get the height that I want. Okay, lefties, you can actually trim this edge going at 3 o'clock instead of midnight, like how I showed earlier. And I actually think that's a little easier than doing it with a right hand at midnight. Alright, the downside of coating your piece with water is all your trimmings will start sticking, so you just gotta kind of remove it. Alright, my foot is a little on the wider side, so I'm going to take a little more off from the inside. And before I do that, the most common mistake students do is they trim too deep and they break through. It's the easiest way to check for thickness. Put your finger on top, tap the piece. The more vibration you feel, the thinner the clay. The hollower the sound, the thinner the clay. So based on what I feel, I shouldn't go any more over here. And this height looks like it matches. And I'm going to just make this foot a little skinnier. So I'm going to stand it up, and I'm going to trim the outside to make it skinnier. So I start with the bevel, and then I slowly rotate the tool so it stands straight up, and then it removes any excess that I don't need. Okay, right there looks like a good thickness. Clean up that little edge I made over here. Remove any extra clay I have on the inside. And then I like trimming a little undercut in here so it's easier to grab. So undercut is this little groove in the piece that I can easily grip with my fingers. So I like doing that because it makes this look a little more handmade, in my opinion. So I take another trimming tool, this is a smaller loop tool, and I'm just trimming that little undercut into this edge. Now one thing to remember, if you do this, make sure that this corner here is not too thick, not too thin, or it's going to be prone to chipping. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to round that out a little bit. Right here I'm rounding it out to thicken it, removing the edge, and right there I have my piece done. Last step is number 8, cleaning it up and burnishing. So I'm going to take my sponge. You can see my throw lines on the inside, I have some crumbs on the outside. I'm taking my sponge, adding a light coat of water, just enough to get the clay slightly shiny, and I'm going to use my fingers to then burnish, so to smooth. Okay, now what this does is it pushes all those little clay particles, those rough spots back into the clay, and it just makes your piece that much more smooth. Okay, there we go. I'm going to do the same thing on the foot on the outside, but I'm not going to do it down the side of the piece because it's going to soften all my throw lines. I do recommend for your piece, if you have a smooth wall, you do the burnishing because it will remove any trim lines you don't want to see. Okay. And I'm focusing the pressure on the corners of the foot because you don't want any sharp corners. Alright, there we go. Looks pretty good. I'm going to touch up this slight edge here because I see a little bit of trimmings there. So I'm going to clean that up. And we are going to be finishing up. Okay, so now this is pretty much done. You take your lug, your wad, whatever you want to call it, pry it off, and you keep rotating until each piece is off. Okay, now these logs, pieces will get tossed into the scrap bin. You spray water on it. The trimmings, I have another container for you to put those in. Now we examine the piece, we pick it up, and we take a look. We make sure there's no dings, no dents, no scratches. We smooth out the rim wherever it got messed up. Right over there, I need to kind of buff that out. And then we just make sure it looks nice and clean and ready to get turned in on the shelf that Mr. Wong tells you. All right, there we go. We have our nice finished bowl. I'm gonna leave it upside down for now because I don't want to flip it too early because that can damage my soft rim that I just buffed out. And the last thing I forgot to mention, you have to write your name in the bottom. So you write your first name, last name initial, period number within this bottom section so that we know it belongs to you. And you turn it in on the shelf that Mr. Wong tells you. You toss your scraps, these lugs in the scrap bin, spray water on it, and your trimmings will go where Mr. Wong tells you. There's another container. And that is it. You're done with your first thrown piece.